Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for the Foundation Day webinar, Inspiration into Action, the Importance of Volunteering. Volunteerism is a basic expression of human relationships, motivated by values like those of justice, equality, and freedom. The ethos of volunteerism is infused with values such as solidarity, mutual trust, belonging, and empowerment, all of which contribute significantly to the quality of life. LSEG in Sri Lanka is divided into LSEG Technology, who develop technology solutions for over 40 companies and exchanges, and LSEG Business Services Limited, that act as a specialized capability center to support global operational hubs. Their corporate responsibility strategy involves their markets, services, people, and the communities that they work in. Their long-term objective in terms of CSR is to always add value to Sri Lanka's technological landscape by supporting access to ICT education, gender equality, youth empowerment, and entrepreneurship, which in turn will contribute to the country's social and economic development. While the above remains their focus areas for CSR, they keep it open-ended for volunteer activities, allowing staff to contribute to a range of causes. Across the group, staff get 2 volunteer days per year, and driving this with a fantastic result for 2020 already, which has seen 2,200 plus hours by 350 plus volunteers. So on that note, thank you LSEG for inviting Luminary Learning Solutions to facilitate this conversation centering around the subject which you are so committed to. So joining us on this panel this afternoon, indeed, are 2 modern day icons in their respective areas. It is my pleasure to invite Alison Summers. Now, Alison is the international business leader and champion for nonprofits and women in business. She's an author, speaker, and the executive director for Zonta International USA. Just a little bit about her. She is a board member for 9 organizations. She is the managing director, executive director, and chief staff officer in global corporate and nonprofits. As an executive director for over 30,000 member organizations focused on empowering women in 67 countries with representation at United Nations meetings and commissions on status for women. Good afternoon, Alison, and thank you for joining us. I believe it's a morning.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
Right, and joining her is Prince Adu Apaya. He is the CEO at 1 Billion Africa, a thought leader, a development worker, an inspirational speaker, a TEDx speaker, and a TEX consultant. Prince is what you call a servant leader whose passion is to help eradicate poverty in Africa and to raise leaders. He is the founder and CEO of 1 Billion Africa, a non-profit organization and a movement that inspires and empowers Africa's youth to find problems in their communities and to turn them into projects. 1 Billion Africa's projects and activities have impacted over 12,500 Africans, and the majority of them being youth, women, and children. He discovered his passion for Africa, a true leadership, and a love for humanity at the tender age of 17. So good afternoon, Prince, and welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Good afternoon, Anton. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
And steering the conversation for the next hour is Vidushanatha Vitharana, the founder and destiny architect for Luminary Learning Solutions and Hi-Fi Consultancy. And as your co-host, I'm Anton Thayalan, the chief evangelist for Luminary Learning Solutions. So before we dive in, a quick reminder to everyone, please do feel free to send in your questions from any time from now using the chat option, failing which, feel free to use the WhatsApp number that you'll see on the screen. It's 7722 66622 to send in your questions, and we will blend that into the conversation as we go along. Right, so on that note, let me focus our attention to Alison. Alison, just to set context, tell us a little bit about your story. How did you find yourself in Zonta in supporting women through advocacy?
Well, thank you. As you said, I had quite a robust career on the corporate side. And then I moved to be an executive director of a professional trade association. So in nonprofit, but helping people with their careers and their businesses. And I was speaking quite a bit on the topic of women in business. And so I had this wonderful opportunity find its way to me to combine those things, to be able to work for Zonta International, to work for gender equality and to help women's empowerment, and do it internationally. I've done international business for almost 20 years now. And so it was just really a joy to take the business knowledge I had, but help for more charitable and, making the world a better place purposes.
Thank you for that. Prince, coming to you, sir. Tell us a little bit about how or what was it that initially sparked that flame for you in terms of volunteerism and advocacy at that young age? And tell us a little bit about 1 Billion Africa.
Awesome. So I would like to start from when I was way younger. So this was when I was like 7 years old, 8 years old. I loved to watch, like every kid, of course, the superhero movies and cartoons like Batman, Captain Planet, all those superheroes. And I remember each time I watched these cartoons, I would love to have what I call my imagination trips. So this is a typical me hiding in my corner. And if you see me, you will see me smiling. And in my mind would be wild imagination. So that is me flying over my community, trying to, provide solutions. This was when I was way younger. And so I think it is something that has been in me. And so when I was 17, 18 years old, I went to work at a particular bookshop. I was working in a bookshop. The owner told me, Prince, look, I like you. You can go ahead to read any book that you want. And I was like, oh my God, I want to be here forever. So that was when I started reading a lot of books on leadership and a lot of books on why, Ghana and Africa has so much resources, but we're still tagged as a developing country or continent. It doesn't make sense. And so I started asking myself questions. And fast forward, when I went to the university, I also, at the University of Ghana, I also realized that I loved to join campus groups, during vacations to visit rural communities, on outreaches. And each time I go for such an outreach, I'll come back finding myself sleeping at night, recalling the moment. Let me share a typical example quickly. On one of such trips, I met a little girl around 7, 8 years old, and I asked her, what do you want to become in future? She told me as though she had thought of this already. She said, I want to be a nurse. And I'm like, whoa, nice. Why do you want to be a nurse? And she's like, so that one day when my mom is sick, I can take care of her. So it is stories like this that made me relive those experiences at night. Fast forward, it was somewhere in December 2013. It was around 2:30 a.m. I was just strolling around campus. I used to do that, just thinking and reliving moments. At dawn, 2:30 a.m., that I heard a voice ask me the question, how many problems are there in Africa? My response, you can guess, plenty, like 1 billion problems. But then I heard it again, why don't you create a platform that inspires the 1 billion Africans to find a problem each and turn it into a project? That was my aha moment. That was the flame. Because at the time, our population in Africa was 1.1 billion people. So if everyone is finding a problem each, we get so many solutions. And that was the beginning of the journey for me.
That's fantastic. And Alison, I want to kind of move across to you because I'm conscious of the people who are watching this. And every time people like you speak, there's almost always a question that gets popped up, and it comes on all of our streams. And every single time we talk about volunteerism, this question comes up. So let me start with that obvious question. Where do you find the time for it?
Well, that's a great question because I volunteer a lot on top of what I do in business. So I have I'm a mom, and so I think that's in your DNA to want to make your community and the world a better place. So today my children are 14, 16, and 28. One often married. And what I say is my life can be quite messy sometimes, but it's important that you're leading by example for your children. So, sometimes my kids shake my head because they're like, Mom, you don't know whether you're coming or going some days, but yet they know, what we're trying to do. And they've also come with me for these opportunities as well. And that's where I think it's just so important that we do what we say. Like I admire everything that Prince is saying in his story and his journey, because it's people that make the change. It's not governments and big structures. It's truly us as individuals. But yeah, life gets messy and you just have to accept it.
And go with the flow.
Yeah.
Right. Prince, I'm going to move into you because, and it's wonderful that we have the two of you because in many ways it brings a fair balance to the conversation. You're relatively young. You had the entire world ahead of you. At 18, we all have ambitions of, owning a private jet and, becoming a CEO and all those glamorous things. And you chose to alleviate poverty. Why is that? In the sense of, where does that inspiration come from the perspective of not looking at yourself, but looking at others, number one. And number two, did you ever wonder whether you would want to go into a mainstream job and make money and become individually successful rather than looking at the community overall?
Okay, that's a great question. So I think it has a lot to do with the environment that I grew up in. So I grew up in a kind of environment, I come from a very, very humble background. So myself and four of my siblings, all of us in a room. Across the street, someone is living in should I say, a wooden structure. Somewhere nearby, a single mother struggling to pay the fees of her child. Somewhere, another place within the community, youth who are frustrated because their parents can't afford to pay their school fees. So it's this kind of environment that I grew up in that got me thinking. That is how come I love to be a Captain Planet or a Batman, so that I solve the problems of all these people around me. So I think that is how it started for me. And so it's actually a personal thing that, like I told you, that dawned when I was pacing around campus. Sometimes I'm doing that and I have films of tears in my eye because I'm thinking, if we are truly living our potentials as a nation, then that single mother will not be struggling. Education will be free for her child. Then those youth who are frustrated, they will have opportunities, vast opportunities, and there wouldn't be issues, like that. And so for me, these are some of the things that I observed at a very early age within my surroundings that made me fall in love, with people. I mean, I love people. I love young people. I just want to see everyone smile. And so in fact, when I completed my senior high school, and this is the crazy thing, I wanted to do a program as my undergraduate in leadership. I wanted a course called leadership, but of course there was no program like that. And so what I loved again was computers. And so I studied computer science in the University of Ghana. And so for me, left to me alone, I just wanted to study leadership, to be an expert in leadership, to help bring the leadership potentials in people out so that they can become the best of themselves, to eradicate all these, challenges, like Alison said, to begin to be the change agents of their lives.
Thank you for that, both of you. And that kind of begs another question on the whole aspect of volunteerism. Organizations like LSEG works in rather stressful circumstances. The challenges are very, very high. All of us in corporate environments, and Alison, you will relate to this quite well. There is no 9 to 5. We work round the clock, and when we are not working, we are thinking about work. In the midst of all of this, there is a part of us that somehow remains unfulfilled. And much of that has to do with the fact that all of us, I think, somewhere down the line, at some point in our lives, yearn to do something that's bigger than us as an individual. And that's, I think, where volunteerism comes in. And some get into it relatively early in their careers, some get into it rather late in their career, some get into it after retirement. But at some point, I think we all have that urge to do something more, do something for the communities. And you've been on both sides of the fence on this. You've been in corporates and through things like CSR, helped communities. On the other hand, you are part of an organization that is very much about uplifting communities. What is the impact you see of volunteerism as a concept where you work for nothing? You give up your time, your free time, sometimes your resources for a cause that you believe in. What is the impact? What is honestly the impact that it has on the communities at large?
Great question. One, I think I want to roll back because like as you look at me on this screen, you all are meeting me at the point of where I'm at now in my life. And I had actually very humble beginnings. And if it weren't for people, I didn't have family that went to college. I didn't have family, that had opportunities. And if it weren't for people that gave back along the way for me, I wouldn't be able to do what I do for other people today. And so I think, if you've been a benefit of people giving to you, it's why you're willing to work tirelessly for others. Or if you in your lifetime had an injustice, I've had very difficult times as a woman. I think, the statistics on violence against women, most women are not untouched by that. And so when you have either experienced hardships or the problem, as Prince says, find the problem, solve the problem, or you have, had other people reach out and help you, it helps you give back to others. So I think you're motivated to work tirelessly and work those extra hours, but also just as human beings, I think when Anton did the introduction, right, is we're here for the human relations and for the values, and we have to be a society of values. This is, it's up to people, and so we do all need to work tirelessly. And sometimes it's not fun, it's not good, because again, we're all humans. And one of the things I see in the organization that I work for is a lot of conflict between individuals who are out there trying to do good, because we all have different views on how that good should happen, or how the money should be spent, or how contracts should be written. But as long as we see that flagpole, that goal that we're all working to, it makes a big difference.
Thank you for that. And Prince, slightly different take on that, because you started out when you were very young, wanting to go on a different path. And I know that's not easy, especially when you come from backgrounds which are not privileged. If you had parents who could bankroll you and say, hey, you know what, don't worry about this, we got your back, go and do what or what excites you, what you're passionate about. That's a whole different conversation. But when you come from relatively modest backgrounds and you have something personal that you have to sacrifice in order to do good, that's a lot to take in. So what I want to ask you from the perspective of everyone who's listening in, who probably is asking themselves the question, look, I need to sacrifice something in order to kind of do this, to really get out there and volunteer. Sometimes it is time, sometimes it's an entire career, like you have that. How do you make sure that you convince those around you? Sometimes, even if you wanted to, people around you are the naysayers who come and say, hey, you know what on earth are you thinking? You know, I mean, 1 billion people, well, first sort yourself out. Did you have that kind of comeback from your family? And if so, how do you kind of sort that out at home?
I'm laughing because I'm just recalling an experience. So this was my girlfriend. Okay, she told me, Prince, you're going to die young if you want to do this. You know, and I'm just trying to say that yes, you are right. It's not everyone that feels this way. But what I have done along the journey is to speak to their heart. You know, try to sell to such people the reason why I'm on this journey in the first place. So one of my challenges as a young leader, okay, is how to get other young people to join you when you are not giving them, for example, you're not giving them $1,000 by close of the month to whatever money by close of the month. So how do you do this? And this is a question I asked myself from the beginning. And I realized that it works when you connect with your heart. When you make them see why you are doing what you're doing. So, for example, we celebrate our what Gordon Tredgold will call breadcrumb success. He told me, Prince, celebrate your breadcrumb success. So when you go to a community and you're able to make someone smile, remind your team, hey guys, look, we were able to put a smile on someone's face. Had we not gone there, that person would not have gotten that particular smile. So like Alison was alluding to, it's a whole humanity thing that I have had to, you know, convince or share it. Anytime I get the opportunity to stand on a stage, I try to connect to the hearts of the people. And that is what I have, you know, tried to do along the journey.
I mean, thank you for that, Prince. Just on that note of going out and reaching and going ahead and doing the things that you do, I have a question, which is, in terms of community impact that you have seen through volunteerism, talk to us about what volunteerism can accomplish for these communities. Maybe an example or two, one of the most memorable ones that you can think of, and I'll come back to Alison on that. Okay,
so let me share a recent example. We just started a 2-year project called STEM for Africa, STEM, Science, Technology, Engineering, Mathematics. So we have identified a community 7 hours away, a 7 hours drive from Accra. It's a rural community, and we have looked for selected 10 schools, 1,000 beneficiaries from these schools. And for 2 years, we're taking them through experiential STEM education. These are students with no labs. I mean, when we're talking about circuits, when it's time for science class, you're talking about building a circuit, you do it on a board. You don't do it in a lab because there's no lab. So we found a partner, Dex Technologies. They have sort of shrinked a whole lab into a portable, you know, backpack that you can put the students can put in their bags. You know, so we've given 1,000 students these science sets. We're training them for 2 years through their normal curriculum. Now the volunteerism part comes in here when, along the journey, a university that is about a tertiary institution that's about 40 minutes drive from this community. We get 10 volunteers from there who goes like, you know what, we want to tag along with this project. Why? Because I tell you the truth, and this is something that really touched me. Just the first lesson that the students, one of the classes, they learned. A girl built a boy built a standing fan with the little things that we taught them. He brought outside materials, added it to what we have given to them, and built a fan. You know, I mean, this is something that is, you should see it. And every one of my team members saw this and were like, wow. So, and volunteers are helping to make this happen. Those students from the tertiary institution, they are coming in, you know, interns to help the science teachers, you know, teach these students how to gain the practical STEM experience. And so within the same community as well, we've gotten people who have come on board the project to support, volunteer their time, because by close of the day, they are seeing smart students do stuff out of the you know, it's just like we are showing them how to fish, right? And so we give them something little and they create things out of it. And that is very inspiring.
Thank you, Prince. Alison, your experience with community impact, and you've seen a number of communities. Tell us what was memorable for you.
So the structure of Zonta, I'm going to do it within the structure of Zonta, is we have 1,200 clubs that work in their local community, and they get to pick what they want to do. So we have clubs that in certain countries that have homes where they've rescued females from human trafficking, and they're helping them get back on their feet and back into society. We have some places where clubs adopt a local domestic violence shelter, or and other projects where right now we have a global campaign to end child marriage, which is actually quite prevalent even in the United States, which most people don't quite realize. So I think with Zonta, we see such really heartfelt projects happening at the community level, but then because these members of the club and the community are part of a larger international umbrella, it gives them more powerful voice at the table when they go and speak to their government officials. So Zonta, we have both hands-on volunteering and also advocacy, because we believe that the change happens when you can change laws and regulations and even just raise social awareness. So we see a lot of projects where if they're doing, so we're about to enter the 16 days of activism, which if you hadn't heard of, it is the Unite campaign to end global violence against women. And so we have a program called Zonta Says No, and our members around the world will pick projects locally, and it might be awareness building. Like in Italy, they've done projects where they bring out pairs of shoes for every woman that has died during domestic violence in the last year in their community and lays them out in the square. So that's just a different aspect of volunteering, right? You've got, like Prince said, that you're going to make that immediate change and impact for a one-on-one life, but also you need to create, you know, perception change in society and ultimately try to help get laws changed. And a lot of what Zonta does as well is about economic empowerment. So we do a lot of scholarships, and we do a lot of training programs. We have an international program right now in Madagascar in partnership with UNICEF, where again, our local clubs all forward some money so that collectively we can use the money for a major impact. So in Madagascar, we're building schools and and helping young women have the skills they need to be self-sufficient. As Prince has said, it's about how do you help, like the STEM program you're talking about, people have the opportunity to earn a living, because that changes communities dramatically as well.
Thank you. Can I quickly kind of dive into something slightly controversial? And this was a question that came in from the audience as well. There is generally this perception, and I don't mean to kind of broad-based generalize everything that advocacy and NGOs do, but there is a general perception that most of the work that gets done is a feel-good thing through volunteerism. You feel bad about something, you step in, you do something, and then it dies a natural death. It doesn't sustain itself. And this is quite a common kind of pushback that whenever we talk about volunteerism and asking people to come, lots of people do say this, what happens next? Can I throw that question to you, Alison, because it kind of tags along with what you said just now about advocacy as well as more long-term programming that happens. It might not be the same group of volunteers that actually sustains an initiative. It might be waves of volunteers. But what do you tell volunteers who have this doubt whether what they do actually makes impact in the long term?
No, it's a great question. I'm president of a volunteer board right now, where the group wants to introduce a mentoring program, and it's a great idea. There's no doubt that it's a great idea. But I have that concern that you've got these ambitious people today that want to launch something, and I'm asking them, what's the framework for the long-term success? And so I completely know what you're saying. I would say I've seen both things happen. Zonta has a very firm belief when they do projects, they want to know that it will make a difference and that they can put their money in to be a leader and then scale it out. So we had a major project in Rwanda where we went in and built one-stop centers for women to go to confidentially, and they could get their medical care, their legal care, their social care, and Zonta went in, and then the country of Rwanda believed in them so much, they then picked it up and continued the project. And that's a great example of where it was successful and others stepped in to carry it forward. But it is disheartening when you put something out there and it can't sustain. So I think it's beholden on the people who start it to, one, know they're starting it for the right reason. I think, Prince, you said it really well about, how do you motivate people to action and how do you tell the story so more people want to come in? And so I don't have like a magic wand answer, but it is a problem, especially if people get dependent on the resources that are coming to help them. I mean, communities can't count on outside entities to come in and rescue them. And so you've got to figure out that mix of activating others to carry it forward. It's a tough question.
Could I just quickly do a follow-up before I move to Prince and talk to him about how to galvanize support from communities through volunteerism? You spoke about frameworks, and I think that's an important one to touch even when volunteers are getting in. Maybe that's something that you want to kind of expand on just a little bit, because when volunteers do look for opportunities to volunteer for and organizations to volunteer with, I think that's a good starting point, isn't it? To understand whether they do have a framework and whether it actually goes beyond the project that they are about to embark on. That gives an indication of whether that organization is generally serious about long-term programming or not. So some advice to young volunteers who are looking for organizations to move in and do volunteering work with. What should they be looking out for in order to make sure that their time is well spent?
Again, very, very good question. And the answer is probably on multiple layers, because sometimes if it's the right cause and the right thing in your heart, you can jump in and help. And I think it's a question of, am I do I know and recognize that I'm just jumping in to help at this point in time and then I'm going to walk away? Or is it someplace that I really want to invest for the long term? And I think in the framework, there are things you can check. And I'll give you a great example. Zonta has been around for over 100 years and has a very solid, proven framework. But in recent years, and we live in a society where everybody's starting their own kind of nonprofit. So there's all of these entities popping up all over the place and very good causes. But if you're going to want to align yourself for the long term, you should just know who the board of directors are or who's kind of managing the money for the organization. Good charities have their documentation made available publicly. You know, they might have a charity rating, they might not, depending on the country or the place. But just investigate the integrity of the people. At the end of the day, it's about making sure that you believe the activity that you're doing is going to create the change that you want, and it is going to have that impact. But I think there's a difference between where you say, I'm going to volunteer, give my time, versus when you move up a level and you say, I'm going to serve as a board member, or I'm going to invest a lot of money. Then the framework, I think, becomes more important. But again, those things shouldn't keep you from helping good causes. You know, you should help the good causes.
Absolutely. Prince, I'm going to move into you with a similar question, and I'm going to line it up with something that came in from the audience. There were a couple of questions that came on the same light. And let me try and conceptualize this the best I can so that there's one question or two questions to answer rather than a whole harangue of them. But I think there's a lot of questions where volunteers are worried sometimes that when they do this, that there is an expectation that this will be there all the time. So that their time, people don't sometimes understand when they volunteer that it is actually volunteer time. And it can be quite difficult to draw that line. So how do you as an organization or as a movement make sure that volunteers' times are not necessarily abused, so to say, if that's the question that was asked? So I tried to put it as diplomatically as possible. But something along the same lines, if I may just put that question into it as well, is the issue of sometimes projects don't necessarily go according to plan. And how do you make sure that, especially when there are volunteers involved, how do you navigate that? Because sometimes projects just don't go according to plan, and there's a lot of heartache around that.
Yes, so for me, I think it's an issue of expectations management, right? So, for example, we start this particular, if I can use the same project that I was speaking about earlier on, we have a whole 2-year plan that we let everyone be aware of what we want to do. From A, we want to go to B. From B, we want to go to C. And maybe we are at A before we get to C, COVID comes into the play. So what do you do? You know, I think it's an issue of expectations management and involving the volunteers in the decision making, you know, so that by close of the day, you started a project and then all of a sudden you just tell volunteers, hey, you can't do this, you can't join us for this any longer, and that's it. No, I don't think it helps with the accountability. I believe in involving volunteers, involving everyone on the team from the beginning, involving them in decision making, and even to help shape your next step, you know, along the project journey.
Thank you, Prince. Just, I understand where both yourself and Alison come in, but I'm just going to ask you something in terms of the landscape of volunteerism itself, right? Now, you've been doing this for a number of years now, and clearly the landscape of volunteerism has changed over the last few years. what are the kind of challenges that you face or you have faced when it comes to driving it? Because it's one thing to have passion for wanting to do something and you know you're doing the right thing, but quite often it's easier said than done, right? So what are the kind of challenges that you've come across and how did you overcome them?
Look, you've just hit the nail right on the head. Sometimes it is very, very difficult, especially for me. Should I say unfortunately? Fortunately, unfortunately, choose the one you want to use. I didn't have years of experience, like years of experience before becoming the leader of my organization. I've had to learn a lot of things on the go. So I long for capacity building. If there's an opportunity, I just jump on it. You know, and this is with the mind that it will help shape me for whatever challenges that are ahead. Now, one of the typical challenges that I would love to share is that, you know, it's with the issue of time. Sometimes people commit to a certain task that by close of the day they are not able to deliver as they are expected, you know, and they are volunteering. So you can come and say, hey, I'm firing you, as though you are paying the person, giving the person a salary by close of the month. I don't know if you get what I'm trying to say. So it's really been a very huge challenge personally for me. A typical example, one of my team members, he happened to even be a roommate when we were in school. We had to take him off the team, and it was a difficult thing to do, but the work must go on, you know. So this is an example of a challenge that I have faced on the whole volunteering journey. Sometimes as well, for a leader like myself, there are expectations from family, there are expectations from society. You know, we're expecting, hey, you've gone through the university for 4 years, you studied computer science. Now, what are you saying? You're giving your time 50%, 1 billion Africa, 50% IT consulting, or what are you doing? So for me, I work as an IT consultant. I work for 1 billion Africa. So the whole, you know, attention game is one of the challenges for me, you know. And I'm looking for it to get into the point where, you know what, I put aside everything that I'm doing to focus on my passion 100%.
Thank you for that, Prince. Alison, just moving over to you. I know in your case, it's nearly 30 years of volunteerism, I would say, right? And you've seen quite a lot in that journey, and you've certainly seen the landscape change. What are some of the challenges that you've faced when trying to steer this entire concept across, and how did you overcome them?
Well, I echo what Prince has said, is that you know, if I look at the landscape like on a longer term, people would pick their kind of volunteer lane, whether it be a religious institution, whether it be a social group like Rotary or Lions, or whether it be a personal cause that they feel very, very strongly about. So like one of my causes right now is, as we've discussed, Anton, is I have a child who lives with chronic illness, and that creates a whole different family dynamic. So the thing is that previously people would pick a lane, and they would give a long-term commitment to what it is that they were standing behind, and whether it was like a capital campaign to build a building, or whether it was just, you know, long things, big projects. Fast forward to where we are today, a lot of volunteers want to show up. I actually know a girl who started a website for micro donations that they're just looking for $8 a month on like a subscription donation basis, because that's like the world we live in, right? This small gifts subscription basis. And we think that if we post a social graphic on social media, that we've done our charitable good in the world. So it is different, trying to get people to step up and commit time. Time is the most precious commodity. You know, we're competing with our phones all day long. We're competing with games. We're competing with, in certain societies, different things. And it's sad. So what happens is you have volunteers, as Prince said, that can they commit to deliver, and you have to manage the leadership that you do. I think about it like we said, I started in corporate and worked my way up. Leadership in a nonprofit volunteer-based organization is a completely different animal. How you motivate and incentivize your volunteers to see it all through. And it is more awkward when you have conversations about, let me take that off of you because you're not getting to it. But we're going to be in a tough place if we don't become a global society of people that can commit, and not commit for the next 5-10 years, but at least step up and commit to a certain length of time to see results, because we can't write our problems away with a check. You can't do that.
Thank you, Alison. And you just mentioned that there are lots of volunteers coming forward, right? And we live, and especially with LSEG and the technology world here, the BPO sector, there are lots of youth joining employment, and they are keen to join in and become volunteers, right? And there's a lot of excitement there. And I've got an interesting question that's come in also from one of the attendants, one of the audience members, is how do you prevent volunteer burnout so that you don't become jaded? And I think that's an interesting one. I was going to ask you something very similar to it, but I guess I will ask this first. Alison, would you like to take that, because you've seen a number of countries with Zonta's presence? What is your advice? What are your thoughts?
So volunteer burnout's a real thing, and when it happens, it can, as we talked about, devastate the ability to have the projects be sustainable. And this goes back to my piece about leadership is very different when you're loving and caring the people that are working shoulder to shoulder with you on volunteering. So I think you have to recognize it and try not to lose people before they get so far burned out that they've gone beyond a place of recovery, because that will happen. And we try so hard to take every penny that we get and put it out into the charity that we've promised, but you do need to think about how you are caring and recognizing and rewarding your volunteers. I used to have a job where I worked in the space of human motivation and reward and recognition, and so those strategies that you apply in business to reward and recognize people, we have to do it in the volunteer space. You can't publicly thank people enough, but also so that they can go back and show their families that they are appreciated. And so I think a balance to the burnout is to make sure that those of us that operate organizations, NGOs, charities, nonprofits, that we don't underappreciate the time that people are giving to us, and we find creative ways to thank them. So I'll give you a very tactical example, is we will write letters volunteer's employer, if they want it, to explain what they did in the last year in their volunteer role. Because, you know, we all know the best way for a young professional to build their business skills isn't in their corporate day job necessarily. The best way a young professional can build their leadership skills is through volunteering. And you can tell I get really excited about this. I'm very passionate about it, because a young person can get to sit at a board table and be a board member and actively create change and have a voice in a way in a volunteer organization completely different than they can in their corporate path. So, so yeah, we just have to keep showing appreciation, and those of us who operate organizations, you know, we owe it to our volunteers to help tell them to take a break.
And the moment you said skills, I saw Vidusha's eyes pop, and I know he's got a loaded question for you on that. But sorry, I'm just coming over to Prince on the same note. What have you seen in terms of ensuring or avoiding volunteer burnout? And also, just to add to that, is quite often people get jaded when they don't see immediate results, right? And everyone thinks that when you go in and do something today, you know, presto, it's got to change. People fail to understand that it's a constant process. It needs to be, you know, continuously supported in order for the end results to come out. How do you prevent, or how do you work towards preventing volunteer burnout, as well as people getting jaded when things don't materialize, things don't turn out as results immediately?
Yes, so I think a lot of this lies in the hands of the leader, or this is where leadership comes to play. Like Alison said, you have to find ways as the leader to appreciate the people, so or recognize the people. I can also give some typical examples. In 1BA, we tend to call ourselves as a family, you know, the working team, the volunteers, those on, I mean, the staff and all that. We call ourselves the 1BA family. And so at a typical family meeting, we ask every single person present to share their wins for the week, their wins for the month. So someone's win could be, oh, my sister successfully delivered or gave birth to a bouncing baby boy. That's a win that we all clap to, we all celebrate to, so that you feel you're part of a family. You know, the challenge I have realized is that sometimes leaders of organizations do not put themselves in the shoes of the volunteers. These are human beings with lives, you know, with ambitions and passions. They have their own lives. So if you put yourself in their shoes, then you can understand why they can or cannot do something at a point in time. I do something as a leader myself. Sometimes I just call one of our team members, and we don't talk anything about 1 Billion Africa. We don't talk about our project. We just discuss the person's, you know, plans for the next 2 years or the next 5 years. So I think it is these little efforts that helps dissipate that burnout that they may feel. One last example is that within our organization, one thing that we value is if you came in and you leave the same, we have failed. So we make sure that you build your capacity by the time you leave. And there are several examples. Our head of monitoring and evaluation shared a video on LinkedIn recently, how he taught 1 Billion Africa, you know, was like, okay, a normal NGO. So he came in, and then we're having meetings at night. He has to, you know, write a whole form, I mean, a whole report structured and all that. He was like, you people, I thought you are, you know, a normal organization, but this whole standard procedures, he has learned so much. So that is one other thing. If they feel they are gaining a lot, I think they will feel, no, I'm not the only one giving, I'm also receiving.
Thank you for that, Prince. And I was really itching. I'm conscious of time, but forgive me. I do need to ask a very quick question from Alison before I pass on to Anton for some final questions and closing remarks. Alison, you touched on something really important, and I think it's one of those things that most corporates, when they actually promote volunteerism, are careful about. Is how much is too much involvement? Is there something like that? The question came in from the audience, and I couldn't help but ask this because is there something called too much volunteerism, and is that counterproductive? Because as you mentioned, everybody's getting into it. There's 1,000,001 causes, and we are all passionate about it. But is there such a thing as too much of it? As they say, too much of anything is good for nothing. But in volunteerism, is that a problem? And from the same perspective, from an organization's perspective, how can you kind of claw that back? Because this can be a bit of a Pandora's box. On the one side, you're actually encouraging people to get into volunteerism, but at the same time, one needs to be mindful that they do have a day job as well. How do you balance both?
It's a great question. I think both the volunteer and the organization needs to be clear on time commitments and what people are looking for. And you're right, there are some charities that will swallow you up. I mean, mine included. You know, if you're a volunteer at a Zonta Club, sometimes it's a lot of hours. I think there's a payoff. Like you said, you can, when you have somebody on your staff that volunteers, if you understand what it is they're doing, what role they're playing in the charity that they're working with, and when their like special events are, or when their main activities are, their advocacy events, then the employer and the employee can better figure out that schedule. I don't think I have like a great answer. I stay committed to the fact that people who volunteer become better leaders and better professionals and better time managers and have better hearts. And so I see more upside to it, but I do think there is a point that if it starts to affect your job in some way, you can have a conversation, but anything could affect that, right? You know, what's going on in your personal life, what's going on if you have parents you have to take care of. So it just depends on that situation. But yeah, I had preparing for this the last 2 weeks. One of my volunteer roles, I was like, enough. I can't give you any more time. You guys have to take a pause for at least a week. And so it's a thing that even I, at my stage, have to learn how to say myself. So I don't have a magic answer, but it's a wonderful question.
Thank you, Alison. Thank you, Prince. We are mindful of the time, but just before we part ways, we do have a lot of volunteers, and we know that not just at LSEG, but also throughout, as you yourself rightly mentioned. Your final words or takeaways for those who are involved in volunteering. What would you like to tell them? And I'll come back to you, Prince, in a minute. So, Alison, can we start with you as a takeaway?
So I think the first thing we'd all have to say is thank you. Thank you for being people that care to create change and understand we all share the same human experience. The world's a smaller place, and I've had the blessing of being able to travel to many places, and that human experience might culturally look a little bit different, but it's still people who want to contribute and have productive lives. So even if it's just a small thing that you're doing for one small person, I mean, I go back and think of again, I have no business being where I'm at in my career and in my life based on where I started if it weren't for the kindness and mentoring of others. And so I just, again, governments aren't going to solve society's problems. It's people coming together that are going to create the change. And so I clearly very much believe in it, and I'm happy that at this stage in my career and life, I can work and help others have the great word framework to do what they do. So thank you.
Prince, your thoughts.
So I sum up my thought in a 30-second story. In 1962, I learned John F. Kennedy visited NASA for the first time, and during the tour of the facility, he met a janitor who was carrying a broom down the hallway, and he casually asked him, "What do you do for NASA?" And the man responded, "I am helping to put a man on the moon." So no matter how small your contribution is, I just want volunteers to have the end goal in mind. By close of the day, you're putting a smile on someone's face. You're creating educational opportunities for someone. You are helping women who are women in violence. You're ensuring this does not happen to anyone else. Along that line, you are helping to create change in the lives of people. You're helping to put a man on the moon. So that's what I'll leave for volunteers to have in mind. No matter the little contribution, no matter how small the time you can give, by close of the day, you are contributing to something tangible or significant. So don't give up.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much, and keep doing what you're doing.
Thank you, Alison. Thank you, Prince, for joining us today and for this absolutely fantastic session, for offering us your expertise and doing so genuinely. As rightly brought out, volunteering is at the very core of being a human. No one has made it through life without someone's help at some point. So never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed individuals can make a change. As the saying goes, for alone, we're a drop. Together, we're an ocean. On that note, LSEG, thank you very much for inviting us. It has been an absolute pleasure this evening. And bidding everyone a pleasant evening. Stay safe, stay productive.